Pete, it's all you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Argyropoulos, and I am the president of AHEPA HERMES Chapter 186 in Astoria, New York. I want to take a moment to thank you all for attending our AHEPA Centennial lecture presentation dedicated to all past, present, and future veterans. At this moment, we want to thank all men and women who serve or have served our country. Happy Veterans Day. Tonight, we are thrilled to have three Hermes brothers presenting: Brother Chris Tripoulas, Brother Peter Giakoumis, and Brother Dean Theodosiou. I would now like to introduce Brother Chris Tripoulas. Chris Tripoulas is an assistant adjunct professor of rhetoric and interpersonal communications at St. John's University and the City University of New York, LaGuardia Community College. He holds graduate degrees in interpersonal communications from New York University and education from St. John's University, and is currently a doctoral candidate at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. I apologize, I can't read my notes. He is a regular columnist for the National Herald and Aristia, while his pieces have also been picked up by various websites and online media. One of them is the title AHEPA at 100 Years, Symbiotic Look at the Relationships with Greek Language and Mythology. Brother Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and for being here tonight, everyone. And are we ready to begin?
We are.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, so my presentation is going to focus on the role of the Greek language in AHEPA's history and some prospects for the future. Okay, so I decided to begin tonight's speech with this quote by Odysseus Elitis, who is one of Greece's two Nobel Prize winners in literature. And it's from a speech that he gave to the Greeks in Stockholm who were living there, the Greek migrants, during his Nobel award in 1979. And I think it's a very timely quote, but at the same time, timeless. Okay, and this is translated, of course, from the original Greek that he was speaking to them. But to the effect, it says something that we Greeks are the only ones in Europe who have the privilege to call the sky Uranos and the sea Thalassa, just like Homer and Plato did more than 2,000 years ago. So obviously, it stresses the continuity of the Greek language. And what I hope to impress upon you today is our role in continuing, in prolonging this continuity, right? And what we can do as ambassadors. So we move on to the next slide. And I just want to share with you, just from these quick photos, the importance that the Greek language has held in Western society from the earliest of days, right? And it continues to hold a prominent position. Whatever the political tides may be, all you have to do is take a walk to Columbia University. You could take a look at the library or any other major Ivy League university or other universities at that to get a sense of that. So we have universities, we have government buildings right in our capital, the best example being, and we also have medicine, philosophy. And I don't want to overlook the important role that the Greek language continues to play today for Americans who are not of Greek descent, but who are interested in reading the Bible and reading it in its original language. So it's with these thoughts that we move on. And we are going to look at three things today in today's speech. Right? Our first point will be the Greek language as a part of our intangible cultural heritage. Right? I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. We are then going to talk about the Greek language in America with a very quick overview of what happened in the past. And then borrowing from a Greek word, we're going to look at its melanthology, right? The future of the Greek language and the challenges that we as Greek Americans are faced with, and what may be expected of AHEPA from the community at large. Okay, so we're going on to the next slide. And here we are. And just a couple of brief words about intangible cultural heritage, right? Intangible cultural heritage is a term as defined by UNESCO that encompasses the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills of a group of people. And that includes oral traditions, right, as a vehicle of intangible cultural heritage. That includes performing arts like our songs, our plays, our other traditions, social practices. And so if we go to the next slide, we can take a quick look at this by looking at the concept of linguistic determinism. Oh, please, one slide back, thank you. The concept of linguistic determinism versus linguistic relativism. This was a term that was developed by Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And it talks about the fact that language can influence thought. In linguistic determinism, which was an older concept, the idea was that language was so powerful that it actually governed thought. Over time, that's been watered down, but we still have the concept of linguistic relativism, which says that language exercises a unique influence on the way that we see the world. And so by maintaining the Greek language, we also bring with us a unique mindset, a unique worldview. I'll just give you one or two quick examples. If you think about how many words Eskimos have for snow, or the fact that, since we mentioned the Bible earlier on, all references to sheep, which are plentiful in the Bible, are translated as seals for the Eskimos, because obviously there is a paucity of sheep in their native land. Think about the term philotimo that we have in Greek and how difficult, if not downright impossible, it is to translate into English. And that's why we actually take the term from the mother tongue and move it on and bring it on. So English does that with a lot of languages. And so another thing that I want you to consider as we're talking tonight is, by saving the Greek language, by propagating the Greek language, by maintaining it, we are also keeping alive a unique perspective, a unique Hellenic perspective into the world. So we'll move on to the next slide. And we will talk about struggles on behalf of Greek language, not just on behalf of the Greek language, of all languages. Languages, being such an important part of people's culture and identity, have at times been wiped out by oppressors, by ruling regimes. In our tradition, in our history, we have the example of the Krυφά σχολιά, or the secret schools, where during various times in the of Ottoman rule, and depending on the area that one was in, the speaking of the Greek language was a very dangerous thing to do, right? And certainly it could not be done in it could not be passed on in an organized way. And one way that the Greeks preserved their language was to gather in secret, usually in churches, and pass on the language primarily through the books of our faith. But Turkey has a history of doing this, and it doesn't only do it with Greeks. An example is its oppression of the Kurdish language. Right? The Kurdish language in 1924, there was a mandate by the Turkish state forbidding Kurdish schools or organizations and publications. This was extended in 1937 to a ban on language, clothing, folklore, even names. Right? So words like Kurdistan, words like Kurdish were actually prohibited. During the coup in 1980, even the speaking of the Kurdish language was forbidden, both publicly and privately. Right? Other examples include national divisions in other parts of the world. In Spain, there are very pronounced differences because of linguistic differences. The example being the latest example being Catalan in Catalonia, the use of that language. Canada, Quebec tried to had a referendum to secede on two different occasions in 1980 and 1995, which didn't pass, but in 1995 barely didn't pass. There was like a 1% difference. China, which clearly has many different languages, does not recognize them as languages, but as dialects. And all of this points to the fact that the languages that we speak are inextricably linked to our identity and our sense of otherness. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about the history and what the situation was like for Greek immigrants in the early 20th century during the first major wave. So Greek immigrants who were coming over and leaving their homeland were mostly destitute as they were leaving Greece. And when they came to the United States, they could expect to find very poor working conditions, right? Where primarily they were working as manual laborers. They faced intense discrimination. In fact, that's one of the reasons, that's the primary reason why AHEPA was founded, as you all know. And in other situations, they faced downright hostility, pogroms, violence perpetrated against them. But certainly, even if there was no physical violence, they were marginalized for a long time, as most immigrants were at that time. And it took a generation or two for them to establish themselves and be welcome. So some of the major obstacles that they faced in their new life in the United States was that there was no existing infrastructure. Unlike the Greeks who were going to Egypt or major European cities where a Greek diaspora had been present for centuries, this was not the case in the United States. So they were coming in and there was a clean slate, no pre-existing schools, no pre-existing churches. There were pretty intense cultural differences, right? Let's not forget that at the time that the Greeks were migrating in that first wave, they weren't even really considered European, right? Many of them were coming over from a territory still under the Ottoman Empire, and so they were considered Asian. Right? They had a different language, a different religion. Certainly, this was not congruent to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant model of what America stood for. And at the time, American ethnocentrism was much more prevalent than it was in later decades when America adopted a multicultural model. And so most immigrants were faced with a sink or swim philosophy. So you either had to come, learn the language of the land, quickly assimilate and take on the native customs, or face social isolation, face discrimination, and ultimately lose out on the American dream. If we can move on to the next slide. So the short-term goals of those first Greek migrants were to initially make enough money to send back home to their poor families. A lot of the Greeks who first came to the United States were not planning on staying long term. They were planning on staying for a set period of time until they could raise money, provide dowries for their sisters back home. The dowry was still very popular back then. Look to repatriate, look to start a family of their own once they had been able to establish themselves. But slowly, as situations in Greece continued to remain difficult, Greek Americans saw that their long-term future lied in the United States, right? And so they began to look at their stay here as more permanent. And so their long-term goals included establishing permanency in the United States. This is something that AHEPA was very instrumental in helping to provide, because it encouraged the Greek migrants to quickly become citizens and become active civically. The next long-term goal was to be able to provide services to the next generation. Once the prospect of living here permanently became very evident, that meant that there needed to be a community infrastructure established, and that included churches, but also schools to teach the next generation, organizations to provide camaraderie, not just for the first generation migrants, but for their children, to ensure that the community would remain, to ensure ethnic vitality and the presence of the community. And finally, there was clearly an emphasis on increasing per capita income and education to provide Greeks with upward social mobility, so they can move up from those manual, those jobs of manual labor, into becoming store owners, into becoming entrepreneurs, and eventually take their rightful position in the political life of the land, in the different civic positions that were made available to them. We can move on to the next slide. All right, so what we're going to look at specifically was sort of a showdown, the first perhaps showdown in the history of AHEPA, the 1929 AHEPA Convention. And in that convention, the question of AHEPA's policy on the Greek language was debated. Now, prior to that, I don't know if you can see, but I'm showing you a copy of what was called a preparatory catechism of the officers and members of the AHEPA. Now, I call it a manifesto. I think at the time, I think manifesto is a more appropriate term, but for obvious reasons, 1929, very close to the Russian Revolution, this term was probably out of favor. This is not an official AHEPA document. Instead, it was compiled by a group calling themselves the Great Conservative Part of Our Race. And it was circulated ahead of the convention to AHEPA members and officers for the purpose of preparing them for this debate that was going to be, whose aim was to integrate Greek into the AHEPA Constitution as an official language, but also to make it available or to increase its use at local meetings. We can move on to the next point. So, as I mentioned, when this debate came to a head in 1929, the proposition was ultimately defeated. And this is what the then Supreme President of AHEPA had to say regarding the use of the Greek language. Obviously, there was the situation was sort of coming to a boiling point with various publications and newspapers and debates on the sidelines. So the Supreme President addresses it, noting that AHEPA was neither neglectful or antagonistic towards its mother language, and that the the avowed practice wasn't long-standing at the time because AHEPA was only 7 years old. The avowed practice had been to teach Greek language to those who needed it, and English language to those who needed it. He also clarified that meetings were held according to Robert's Rules of Order in the at the prerogative of the chairperson. So in local chapters where English was predominant or the chairperson insisted on using English, this was the standard practice. If the chairperson allowed for Greek to be used, that would be the standard practice. Also, he makes a point to note that AHEPA makes no mention of any language in its constitution. Move on to the next slide. Okay, so a quick overview of the outcomes. The delegates rejected the motion to make Greek an official language. And I'd like to take this opportunity to point out that I think that this was a very interesting move and a very American move, because like the founding fathers of our nation here in the United States, there is no mention of the English language in the US Constitution. Right? So although English is the language of the land, it is not the official language per se. At times, there have been motions to incorporate English into the Constitution, but they've always been defeated because the founding fathers felt it wasn't necessary. And so the AHEPA delegates at that 1929 convention, in many ways, were taking a page out of the founding fathers' book, whether they knew it or not. To make up for the criticism that AHEPA was somehow not promoting Greek as much as it should, the AHEPA magazine in 1929 featured a variety of interesting articles, including one by a professor from the classics department in Iowa, who actually advocated for the necessity of teaching Greek in high schools and colleges. AHEPA also, throughout the decades, has provided financial support to local Greek schools. In the meantime, after 1929, of course, while people were debating language, little did they know that they were going to be hit with the Great Depression and subsequently World War II. And so that shifted priorities from strictly focus on the use of the Greek language to a wider set of priorities, primarily survival, economic survival during the Depression, and then survival of Greece, right, in World War II. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, following World War II, America begins to embrace multiculturalism, right? And so there is a much different viewpoint on the espousal of ethnic languages. There's a landmark Supreme Court decision, right? Brown versus Board of Education. But subsequent landmark decisions as well that change education policy in the United States. Right? And so, in fact, you even have the phenomena of public schools instituting bilingual or dual language programs, let alone private schools. Right? So all of a sudden, from the 60s on, multiculturalism takes the front seat, and it becomes the new leading force in American exceptionalism. So now that we talked a little bit about the past, as we get ready to conclude, let's take a look toward the future. We have the concept of soft power, which is a concept developed by Joseph Nye, and it basically discusses the ability of a country to persuade other countries to do what it wants without force or coercion, right? And this is a concept, although the Nye coined it in the late 1980s, following 2001, it sort of came back into favor, and it talked about being able to establish a presence without necessarily just military might. An extension of that is cultural diplomacy, right? Which can be described as a course of actions that utilize the exchange of ideas, values, traditions, and other aspects of cultural identity to strengthen relationships and enhance social cultural cooperation. Here's where you don't have to be a foreign minister or a diplomat to play an important role. Everybody can play the role of a cultural diplomat, right? Either in the public sector, the private sector, or in civil society. So one of the organizational challenges facing the Greek American community in the 21st century is how to best utilize this cultural diplomacy, and deciding where the resources will come from to do that, and who will be the ambassadors. Is it just going to be left on the shoulders of one person, one public figure, or is it going to be a more balanced approach, right? So this is something that hasn't really been discussed as much as it should be. And if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the prospects for AHEPA. Oh, sorry, just one back. So traditionally, AHEPA has done a great deal of things both in the United States as well as in Greece. As you see from the photo, we have the AHEPA hospital in Thessaloniki, which continues to be a major hospital in that metropolis. So AHEPA has assisted where there were needs, right? For a long time in Greece, in the after it was ravaged by World War II, there was a need for medical assistance. There was a need for medical equipment, for infrastructure. One wonders if similar needs are not present in the United States. Now, we might not be lacking in hospitals or medical equipment, but perhaps there is a gap in education that needs to be filled. I point to an interesting speech by the former publisher and now executive advisor to the publishers of the National Herald and the Ethnikos Kyrix, Antonis Diamataris, who recently gave a speech to AHEPA Yankee District 7 on October 22nd, where he expressly called for AHEPA to consider setting up a Greek school of its own. Again, should the concept of schools be placed on the shoulders of only one group in the organized community, in our case, parish communities, or is this something that needs to expand as we enter into the 21st century and the concept of schooling becomes perhaps more challenging, more difficult, more financially demanding than it was some 50 years ago? Right. Finally, let's think about the role of stability and leadership during crises, right? If you look around the community, as is natural in all living things, from time to time, there are crises. There are leadership crises, there are organizational crises. And if left in the hands of only one organization or of only one person, it can organization and continuity can very quickly unravel, right, if things aren't being run properly. And so it's a pluralistic approach is likely the best approach, especially in the 21st century. And so one thing that we might consider is, can we be doing more than just providing the traditional stakeholders with some financial support, right? Financial support is great, but I think we need to do a little bit more following through and bringing some more ideas to the table and being a little bit more actively engaged in how these institutions are run. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, I end tonight's. I started the speech with a reference to a Greek Nobel laureate, Odysseas Elitis. Now I'm going to end it with another reference, George Seferis, who was the first Greek to win a Nobel Prize. And in his address to the committee, he notes the following, right? I belong to a small country, a rocky promontory in the Mediterranean. It has nothing to distinguish it but the efforts of its people, the sea, and the light of the sun. It is a small country, but its tradition is immense and has been handed down through the centuries without interruption. The Greek language has never ceased to be spoken. It has undergone the changes that all living things experience, but there has never been a gap. I think about that quote, and I'm overwhelmed by the privilege of being able to participate in this continuity that's lasted for thousands of years, but I'm also overwhelmed by the responsibility. And I think this is a responsibility in the 21st century in America that not only as Greek Americans, but as AHEPans, we cannot afford to shirk. Like this is a responsibility that I think we must be very mindful of. And as we head toward the future and identify the new challenges that face our community, I think that this is something that must preoccupy our discussions, our thoughts, and our planning to a much greater degree. So we can move on to the final slide. I want to congratulate, and just one more click, please. I want to congratulate AHEPA on this milestone, the Centennial milestone, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening.
Thank you, Chris, Brother Chris.
Thank you, Brother Peter.
We are now at the beginning of another presentation. Brother Chris, if you would, I would appreciate a quick introduction and I will take over.
Absolutely. All right, so just one moment, Brother Peter. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce Brother Peter S. Giakoumis, an author, a historical consultant, and subject matter expert on the subject of the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913. He's the director and founder of the Greek American 1912 Project, a former adjunct instructor to the Field Academy with the Department of Homeland Security for 18 years. He holds a master's degree in international relations and is currently the curator of the Heritage Museum of Epirus in Astoria, New York. And he'll be speaking to us. His speech is entitled, Other Founders Within AHEPA.
Thank you. And with that, I will begin a short presentation. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate the kind words, Brother Chris Tripoulas.
My pleasure.
And I am the chapter president, chapter secretary under President Argyropoulos, who is here with us today. And I am honored to be in the presence, of course, of our district lodge lieutenant governor. And my presentation tonight is going to be on other founders within AHEPA. And being that here in the United States, this today is a holiday and it is Veterans Day, I thought that it would be appropriate for us as AHEPans to actually discuss a little bit of our heritage that is sometimes overlooked. On July 26th of 1922, AHEPA, the American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association, was founded by 8 visionary Greek immigrants in Atlanta, Georgia, which for the most part is commonly known. However, going beyond that, I thought it would be important for us to understand that we American citizens of Hellenic descent, with these words, the preamble of the Constitution of the Order of AHEPA begins. It continues, desiring to form, institute, and perpetuate a fraternal order and promote its objects and principles to effect a perfect and harmonious understanding between ourselves and others. And of course, it goes on. However, going beyond those well-established and honored founders, What of the other founders? What of those that then moved beyond and created the AHEPA that we have today, the chapters that we have today? We had heard earlier and previously how difficult it was to do these things. However, can we know a little bit about those that did struggle to create the foundations for this organization? And the answer is obviously yes. Not only did they create this foundation for this great institution that we are a part of today, but many of these individuals that we know that founded various chapters throughout the United States happen to have been veterans, and specifically veterans of a long forgotten war that was fought in 1912 and 1913. It was a milestone in the modern Greek history because the Balkan Wars, two short and timely wars that predate World War I, expanded Greece as we know it today. At the time, it was half of what we know Greece to be. Now, there was a booming of industry in the United States, and that booming industry and industrial revolution in the United States brought thousands, hundreds of thousands of Greeks to the United States, the pioneer Greeks, which we'd earlier heard of. Individuals that showed up in the United States and had no infrastructure, the pioneers. Those pioneers were influenced enough that not only did they start to imagine a life beyond what it was to be in Greece, but always remembered that there was an obligation to Hellenism and the Hellenic kingdom, to the extent that over 45,000 of those migrants that had come to the United States in the early 1900s had returned to Greece to fight in both of those short-lived wars between October of 1912 to the middle of 1913. What is overlooked is that those same veterans, upon their return, the majority of them returned not only with the mindset that they were going to actually be living permanently in the United States, but they carried with them the concept that to do that, they would have to establish a church. To establish the parish was the focal point of the Greek community, whether in the past, the present, or for that matter, the future, and regardless of what country the Greek diaspora goes to. These individuals not only created the first parishes, these Balkan War veterans, they also were instrumental in creating and founding many of the early chapters of the AHEPA. One of the case studies that I actually researched and have the true privilege of discussing and presenting here tonight is a brief case study that I did on the Greeks of a city in New York named Schenectady. The convergence of these migrant Greek American pioneers of the Balkan Wars, the creators of Greek parishes and Greek Orthodox churches, also founded the Order of AHEPA, chapter number 125, and their legacy continues to this day. So what is interesting is that these individuals had the foresight to not only make sure that they, in at least many cases, recruited priests directly from Greece, because these pioneers predated the official establishment of the Archdiocese of North America here, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese here in the United States. So they would actually bring with them. And that is exactly the case of what happened in the city of Schenectady. The city of Schenectady was blessed with individuals such as John Kansas, who with his brothers, at least one other brother, Thomas, left the United States in 1912 to go back to Greece, fulfill their obligation, whether through philotimo or the love for their country or some type of military obligation. But they had and carried the intent of coming back. So perfect example is John Kansas. His brother, interestingly enough, Thomas, was the first president of the parish council and was the one that helped establish St. George's Greek Orthodox Church in Schenectady. So John Kansas, remarkably enough, not only leaves Schenectady, leaves his business behind, was lucky enough that he left family behind in New York, and leaves with his brother Tom, and was able to not only persevere, but also fought his way through both the first and second campaigns and wars of the Balkan Wars, and was able to return in 1914 to Schenectady. And not only did they acquire the land, and then build the church as it was then, they lived through the unfortunate burning of the original church on February 7th of 1937, and rebuilt it. So the actual church of St. George that is there today is the second church that this community built. And so not only did they live through wars, they actually lived through the rebuilding, like the Phoenix, of course, rebuilding and recreating their church above all. But in addition to that, they also founded and created their own chapter there amongst the Greeks. And on the rolls, here, hopefully you're able to see the original charter, which is in possession of the AHEPA chapter of Schenectady. The original charter has a few individuals, not one, but at no less than 4 Balkan War veterans that successfully served, returned, established the church, rebuilt the church, and in the midst of all of that, also were able to create, on the 8th of December of 1926, they founded, through their petition, which was approved, their Schenectady chapter. And those 4 individuals were the founders, were involved in the founding of that chapter, as well as their community. I also found of note in researching this was that because the original church had burnt down, that not only those 4 veterans were involved, but many others, but specifically John Kansas. There are records that clearly reveal that he commissioned icons for the church that was rebuilt, and the icon of St. John the Baptist, located 2nd tier position on the altar iconostasis to the right of the icon of Christ, where it stands to this day, was financed by John Kansas. So it is a testimony to our legacy, to our perseverance, that not only have we lived through some of the most harrowing experiences in the kingdom the Republic, the nation of Greece, but that we've also persevered here in the United States in keeping our culture and to great extents our language. And I thought it was of interest that, of course, the Schenectady chapter, AHEPA number 125, who currently operates, who is still there to this day, is an example of one of many, that there are obviously many, many chapters that can trace their roots all the way back to the first foundings, and that many of those individuals in those original chapters of AHEPA are not only founders of the parishes and churches, but many of them, as well as being instrumental in the creation of the parishes and chapters, are Balkan War veterans. So with that said, I want to extend a thank you, and may the memory of all the veterans and founders be eternal. And I am very, very pleased and honored to introduce our final presenter tonight, and that is Brother Constantine Ordine Theodosiou, who was an American history studies teacher and administrator for the New York City's Department of Education for more than 30 years. He worked as an adjunct professor of political science at Hofstra University and is an avid local history buff, having been published in the Long Island Historical Journal and Nassau County Society Historical Journal. At the same time, he has long had an abiding interest in how Greek American community or communities evolve over time. He believes that the history of Greek Americans continues to be underrepresented when compared to that of other ethnic groups, and welcomes any opportunity to speak of it to a wider audience. Brother Dean, you're very welcome tonight. Brother Dean, unmute yourself, please, while I
got
pull
you.
up your presentation.
Thank you all. And thank you, Brother Peter, for everything that you've just mentioned. Mine is more of a lighthearted topic than the previous two, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have any importance. AHEPA is our collective voice, but within that collective voice, there are many different strands, and I chose to present tonight something fairly lighthearted, talking about Greek American athletes throughout the 20th century that AHEPA has recognized, and with good reason too. I also want to point out, though, that the continuity that Brother Chris mentioned also extends our identity, that continues, extends in many ways. And of course, we need not look beyond the founding of the Olympics to show that Greek athleticism is a strand that is recognized worldwide. But in this country, especially since we have so many sports to deal with, it's a very little known fact that Greeks have participated in American sports to a healthy degree. But that being said, also, it is Veterans Day. And just to show you how involved the Greek American athletes have been in our country as a whole, I was able to bring to the fore three Greek American athletes who have also served in the Army, and a belated thank you for their service. One is Gus Niachas, who you see on the left here. He played for many teams, including the Yankees, but here he's with a Red Sox uniform. He served in the Navy during World War II, stationed at Quonset Point Naval Air Station in Rhode Island. The center picture is Pete Pihos, and he played for the Philadelphia Eagles in the 40s. I'll speak about him more, but his is a very lofty accomplishment. He served as the second lieutenant in the 35th Infantry Division under George Patton, and he won both the Bronze and Silver Stars. So here's somebody that our Greek youth could look up to in more than one way. And to the right, you see Billy Lowe's, number 30 for the Dodgers. Billy was quite a character in his day. Happy to say that he's an Astoria native, and so he could have very well have been a Hermes native had he joined AHEPA. I have no clue had he not, but he was honored by AHEPA. I think it was in 1975, but I could be wrong. But he was sworn into Army service in 1951. So there you have it. You see, Greek Americans have played their role not only in our sports, but also in our armed forces when we needed them most. But getting back to the sports theme, of course, I want to point out that 221 Greek American athletes have been honored by AHEPA since 1975. Now, I want to also point out that some of these names are quite obscure to the wider sports world, or sports history for that matter. But that doesn't mean they should be completely forgotten. But before we get into 5 of my subjects, I want to point out that Greek American athletes span all sports, basketball, hockey even, which is kind of funny considering how Greeks are from a Mediterranean country that is hot, and I was there this summer, and I could tell it was very hot. So you don't think of Greeks going onto the ice. You think of Scandinavian peoples doing that, but Greeks have made a presence in hockey of all sports. As I mentioned, basketball, football, and certainly baseball. But that's not all. Greeks have spanned other realms as well, but I promise to limit my discussion to what I have before me. Also want to point out that AHEPA, and by the way, the AHEPA wiki page is where I got all this information from. Not that I'm pilfering, but I thought it was a good source for this presentation. But let me just go over the fact that AHEPA has recognized outstanding athletic achievements in many ways. Again, this is from Wiki. AHEPA Athletics Department awards scholarships to deserving scholar athletes who have demonstrated outstanding achievements both in the classroom and the athletic fields. The funds are available through the Athletic Booster Trust Fund, established through the donations of individuals. AHEPA hosts many regional and national tournaments in sports such as golf, bowling, basketball, and softball. Again, unless someone is in on the know, we should be able to promote this further. Winners of the tournaments are awarded, in many cases, free travel to the national tournament during the Supreme Convention. So, AHEPA does have a mission statement when it comes to athletics. The most prestigious AHEPA award is the Harry Giakoumis Hellenic Athlete Award. And I saved my talk about Harry. Pete, if you could just give me the second slide there, I'll just point out Harry for the time being. Now that's Pete Sampras. Next one, please. In the center is Harry Giakoumis, and his is a true Sophoclean tragedy. I'll go into it a little bit more when I discuss him, but suffice it to say that had Harry lived to meet his full potential, he would have been the first Greek in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. But his untimely death really rocked the sports world, and he was honored in his own right. But we'll get to that when I speak about him. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying, 59 Greek Americans have been honored with the Harry Giakoumis Hellenic Athletic Award. 3 have been honored twice, and these include umpire Chris Pelikoudis, Greg Louganis, who was of Greek parents, and as we all know today, the Greek Freak, which is a nickname I'm not terribly fond of, but for personal reasons. But anyway, his true name is Yannis Antetokounmpo, who is a phenom, a spectacular player for the Milwaukee Bucks. But on to my presentation now. I chose 5 prominent Greek American athletes that have been honored by AHEPA. And Pete, if you could go back to PP host for a second, please, the football player. In the center there, he played for the Philadelphia Eagles in the 1940s. He was honored by AHEPA in 1975. And of course, when AHEPA did so, it took into account his character as well as his athletic ability. PP host stands as the only Greek, to my knowledge at least, who has been honored by a Sports Hall of Fame. Okay. Among his many accomplishments, he was a two-time NFL champion, a six-time first-team All-Pro, a six-time Pro Bowler. If I'm not making any sense, please let me know. But I'm just reading off here, footballese, if you will. He was a three-time NFL receptions leader, two-time NFL receiving yards leader, the NFL receiving touchdowns co-leader in 1953. He was part of the NFL 1940s All-Decade team. He's part of the Philadelphia Eagles Hall of Fame. He's also represented in the Philadelphia Eagles 75th anniversary team. He's a three-time first team All-American, two-time first team All Big Ten, and two-time second team All Big Ten. Not a shabby resume as far as his athletic achievements are concerned. Unfortunately, Pete passed away in 2011 due to Alzheimer's. We don't know, of course, if it was a cumulative result of his football injuries. That has never been brought up. Nevertheless, the Greek sports world has truly let go of a giant. Second person I want to bring to your attention, Pete, if you could bring up Pete Sampras. Now, whereas PP host is a little bit further into memory, we all know about Pete Sampras, this fine volley shot that you see here. And actually, he really needs no introduction since we all know of him from his playing days back in the 90s and the 2000s. But nevertheless, he has 64 career titles. He ranked #1 in 1993. He won the Australian Open twice, the French Open once, Wimbledon a total of 7 times, and the US Open a total of 5 times. Okay. He won the Grand Slam Cup twice. And yes, he did participate in the Olympic Games. And he holds a record of 64 and 70 playing doubles. Now, I'm no tennis maven, but I know that doubles are much more complicated than singles, but that's just me talking, all right? However, he did win the Australian Open for doubles as well, the French Open, Wimbledon, and the US Open 3 times, okay? So I think we could say that Pete ranks among the top tennis players, at least in the latter half of the 20th century. Pete, if you don't mind going to George Pappis. Okay, George Pappis to the right here, he, with his arm up, he was a bowler. Now, bowling happens to be a sport near and dear to me because I was the captain of my football team. No, I wasn't inspired by George Pappis, but more like Earl Anthony, but that's besides the point. George Pappis also racked up many impressive victories, foremost being the 1979 Firestone Tournament of Champions, which is one of the premier championships that a bowler could secure. I could go into his resume also, but that is certainly the high point. In the interest of time, I want to go to Jim Londos, who you see here, barrel-chested, ready to grab, I don't know what, but nevertheless, there he is. Yeah, sorry. Okay. But he was known as the Golden Greek. In fact, let me just say this. There are many allusions to Greek athletes as Golden Greeks, which is all well and good. Harry Aganis was known as the Golden Greek of the baseball world, although there have been others. It made good copy. And what I'm saying is that the newspapers back then, they weren't interested in writing for the ages. They were interested in just getting people to buy the papers. So Golden Greek had a wonderful alliteration to it. but they used it somewhat indiscriminately after Harriaganis. Almost any Greek player was a golden Greek if he made a spectacular play or that he gained some notoriety of some kind. Nevertheless, that's something that we should all be mindful of because right now, I'm not saying it's pejorative to say golden Greek. It certainly doesn't sound like it. But I want us to be aware that when it comes to labeling, Greeks are much more complex than a label would suggest. And even though back in the 1950s, when I'm sorry, from the 1930s to the 1950s, when Lundas was at his peak, he of course achieved that designation in its most wholesome sense. If I could read off his accomplishments, he was the world heavyweight champion, 5 times. He won posthumously the Cauliflower Alley Award, the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, the International Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, Maryland State Athletic Commission, he was mentioned in that, Minnesota State Athletics Commission, National Wrestling Association, New York State Athletic Commission, and the list goes on. But, back when, in the 30s, when Lundas was at his peak, he won the hearts of Greeks everywhere. He came as a Greek immigrant to this country. And when he went back to Greece, he was hailed as a national hero. He died, I believe, in 1975, if I'm not mistaken. But nevertheless, he was awarded the highest award. You could help me out with this, which is what the king would, bestow upon a subject, something on the Order of the Cross, something like this. I don't know, but he was hailed as a national hero. Okay, but anyway, getting to the center of the panel here is Harriaganis, and Harriaganis is a true, as I mentioned before, true tragic story because he showed such promise. Now, there are 2 books that, and there should be more, but there are only 2 books that speak of Harriaganis. The first one is written by 2 authors, co-authors, Andy Dabilis and I just lost the other one. It was on the top of my head, but it was talking about the All-American Greek, and they mentioned Harriaganis, and it's a hagiography for sure, but nevertheless, it's one that is well deserved, meaning that the accolades that Harry had achieved from his days in high school were quite significant. In fact, at a time when, of course, his parents came from Greece, they lived in Lynn, Massachusetts, a working class neighborhood outside of Boston. Harry, from the start, showed his true Greekness in the most positive way, his philotimo, by staying true to his family and his faith and his community. And he really won the hearts not only of the Greek American community, but he branched out into the wider athletic world. By the time he was in college, football was the thing, and he was the star quarterback, winning All-Americans titles and stuff. But you see, even from that point on, the Cleveland Browns were interested in signing him. But Harry had the world at his feet, so he chose to play for the Boston Red Sox. And why was that? Because he wanted to stay close to his mother, who had been widowed, and he really was devoted to her. So that's another aspect of his devotion and his wholesome Greekness, which is something that we should acknowledge. So he did play for the Boston Red Sox, and he was off to an auspicious start. But fate has a way of getting in the way of having fun. By 1955, he fell ill with pneumonia. And from that pneumonia, eventually he suddenly died of a pulmonary embolism. He was only 26. Wow. And it really shocked the sports world back then. A lot of people were saying that had he lived, he would have been the next Lou Gehrig. But as it stands right now, Harry is in the College Hall of Fame. If you go to his alma mater in Boston College, you'll see a statue that was erected with Harry. It's in a separate, almost like a mausoleum setting. And it shows him in his football uniform. and he is projecting a football with his other arm stretched out. And when you look at it, you can't think of anything else but Zeus hurling a thunderbolt. I think that was done deliberately. I think that the coincidence, it's not a coincidence that they did that, but still it shows the love of for Harry Aganis for who and what he was.
What's his name?
So,
Huh?
pardon me? I'm sorry? Oh, I thought, so I don't want to belabor this anymore, just to say that, you know, because we just had the World Series, I thought maybe sports would be a nice way to tie this presentation up. I want to thank you all for listening, and I yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Peter Argyropoulos, our chapter president. Your final thoughts?
And I think this was a fantastic presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I want to thank all three brothers for your fantastic work on presenting us some wonderful history. And it truly was great to listen to it. And I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Brother Chris, for logging on. We were thrilled to have the Lieutenant Governor of AHEPA here. Thank you, and well done, brothers. I give you my sincere thank you from myself and our chapters, and well done, brothers. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that concludes Brother Chris Tripoulas. Any comments?
No. I too would like to thank Brother Peter for the kind words, and everyone for joining us.
And Brother
Zita
Chris,
AHEPA.
obviously.
Zito AHEPA. Zito.
Brother Chris Pappis, closing words?
It was a very nice presentation. I enjoyed it. I saw the Schenectady on yours, actually. And that was interesting. And then I saw myself in those pictures because I was there when we did that. And I also enjoyed the athletic presentation and Brother Christopher's presentation on the history of from the 1929 convention. I didn't know about those things. So.
Thank you, Brother Pappis, for attending and for listening. Spread the word that we did this, okay? And that they could tune in to our channel. And
yeah, if you send me the recording, Peter, I will. If you put on YouTube, we can send the link out to the recording from the YouTube.
That I will do. Not a problem. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I'm going to now end our presentation. Thank you everybody that watched this in its a rerun, and of course I'm very proud to have presented with all of you. And if anybody wants to get in touch with us as the chapter secretary, I'll put out our email. It's ahepa186.hermes@gmail.com.
oh, if I can make one more say, I forgot to mention the second book that you can find Greek athletes, Baseball's Golden Greeks by Diamantis Zervos. You could still buy a copy on Amazon, although I think it's out of print. And if you're interested, it's really meant for young Greek Americans, by the way, but I learned a great deal from it. So if you're interested, I recommend it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And may the memory be eternal of all the veterans that have passed.
I mean,
Take care all.
Take
Thank
care,
you,
Petey.
guys.
Be good. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, yes.
Yahara.